Hello and welcome to another edition of On Our Terms, a video series by AIA Contract Documents. In this video, we are going to be talking about the Pro Bono Agreement, which is the B106-2020 Owner-Architect Agreement for Pro Bono Services. As always, we are your hosts, Mike Koger and Jimmy Germano. We are both attorneys in the American Institute of Architects Contract Documents program. As always, it's important to remember that nothing you hear today is going to be legal advice, and the best thing that you can do if you do have legal questions is to consult an attorney who is licensed in your jurisdiction, who you can talk with about the particular facts and circumstances at issue in your case, and some more information about that disclaimer is on your screen. And with that, I will turn the mic over to Mr. Koger to get us started with the B106-2020. Mike?
Excellent. Thank you, Jimmy. So as you mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the B106 standard form of agreement between owner and architect for pro bono services. This is also known as just the pro bono agreement. As the name suggests, this document is intended for situations where an architect is going to be providing design services for free. It was originally published in 2010, and we're publishing an updated version of this in the fall of 2020. So you should be able to find the new version of the B106 on our website starting sometime in October of 2020. During this relatively short video, I'm going to be highlighting some of the key features of the B106. I'm going to be pointing out how it's different from our other owner-architect agreements, and also how the new 2020 version is different from the original 2010 version that you might already be familiar with. Before I get into some of the nuances of the B106, I want to give my 30-second pitch as to why architects should consider using the B106 for their pro bono agreements. So here's the quick sell. First, the B106 is completely free. We don't charge for it. You can get it on our website and download it fairly easily. And second, it includes some important provisions that help architects offset the risk of providing services for free. So these are provisions that I'll go through in this video that you aren't going to see in our other B100 series agreements. So if that sounds enticing, continue listening on to the rest of this video. The basic format for the new B106 is a menu of services like what you see on the screen. I'm only showing about the first half or maybe even a third of the menu of services, but it gives you an idea of what it looks like. If you're at all familiar with the old version of B106, the 2010 version, you'll remember that the services looked a lot like they do in the B101. So essentially, the old B106 presumed that the architect would be performing the basic 5 phases of architectural service, schematic design, design development, all the way through the construction phase services. After talking with a number of architects who regularly do pro bono projects, we learned that when architects do offer their services for free, they don't always want to be doing or aren't always asked to do all 5 phases of traditional design. So that was a presumption that we had in the 2010 version of the B106 that we wanted to change. Architects may just be doing early design work like schematic design, or they may be doing something else altogether. They might be doing site analysis, zoning analysis, historic preservation, and so on. So we modified the B106 to make it a bit easier to use for any set of services that an architect might be providing for free. And so now with the 2020 version of the B106, you simply select the services that the architect is going to provide from the menu. There's no assumptions in this document. You pick the services yourself. So now I'm going to go pretty quickly through some of the provisions that I mentioned early on that help the architect deal with risk on a project where they're already not getting paid. First, there's a provision at section 7.1.5, provision that's on the screen, that allows the owner and architect to negotiate a limit to the architect's potential liability that arises from the project. You can always insert a limitation of liability provision like this into an owner-architect agreement, but it's just not something that you're going to find as standard language in most of our other B100 series documents. Next, the B106 requires an extra step in the dispute resolution process before the parties can go to mediation. And this step is the meet and confer sessions. You're not going to find this in any of our other, I don't think we have it in any of our other B100 series documents, But it is a meeting between the representatives of the architect and of the client to try to resolve any disputes before they actually give rise to a mediation or go to a more formal process like a mediation. In all other owner-architect agreements that we offer, if there's a dispute between the owner and architect, either party can immediately initiate a mediation pretty much at any time. But mediations can be expensive to attend and to prepare for, so we require this meet and confer session in the B106 as a way to hopefully resolve disputes before they start to rack up legal fees and other kinds of costs.
So Mike, I have a question. The meet and confer section that's there, is that unique to this document simply because it's pro bono and it's meant just to streamline that process to save money for everyone given the unique nature of this document? Is there anything else to that, like kind of underpinning the meet and confer requirement? Sort of like, why is that in there?
Good question. And that meet and confer requirement comes from the 2010 version, so it's been around for a while. And my understanding is that it is specific to the B106 pro bono agreement. It is something that we added as an extra step to hopefully cut off disputes and to resolve disputes before they start to incur additional costs. Mediations are certainly not as costly as going to trial or an arbitration, but they do cost a fair amount to attend and to prepare for. So we wanted to add this layer of just a layer of trying to get the parties to talk before they go down the path of mediation, particularly in a on a project where the architect's not getting paid. They want to see if they can't resolve disputes quicker. I don't think this is something we've talked about in the context of other agreements, but I don't think we've ever added it as a requirement to any of our other documents. Do you know differently than that, Jim?
Yeah, no, not that I know of. And like you're saying, I think it makes sense. I mean, if you have a typical agreement, I mean, disputes arise on every project or most projects, so I guess the parties can always price that in to their bid, whether it's an actual factor in their pricing or just kind of a general understood, it's how they essentially underwrite, for lack of a better term, all their quotes and their pricing and stuff. So, but if this is pro bono, there's no fee, that sort of makes sense. So that does make sense to me. Thanks for clarifying that.
Sure thing. And there's nothing to stop the parties from doing a meet and confer session on their own if there's a dispute. But this is kind of a more formalized requirement that this happens before mediation can happen. So moving on, another thing that's kind of easy to overlook in the pro bono agreement is that both the owner and the architect can terminate the contract for convenience. Normally, this is a right that only the owner has, but in the B106, the feeling is that if you're providing your services for free, you need the ability to get out of the situation at any time for any reason. This sentence is kind of easy to miss. It's tucked right in the middle of Article 8, but it's an important right that the architect has in this agreement, and it's not at all common to most owner-architect agreements. And lastly, I should point out that there is a compensation section to B106 that might initially sound a little bit counterintuitive. Compensation on, a pro bono project doesn't necessarily strike home as being something that you would see in this agreement. It doesn't actually require the architect to get paid for a fee for its services, but it does require the owner to assess the value of the architect's donated time and to provide the architect with appropriate recognition. Also, and I haven't shown it on the slide here, but the architect is entitled to get its expenses reimbursed from the client. So if the architect had to make prints of drawings or travel out of, to a job site or something for a site visit, they can get those expenses reimbursed. And that is it with the pro bono agreement. Jimmy, any other questions?
I guess I have maybe a big picture question, and it seems like over the last 15 minutes or so, you sort of answered this in general terms, but I wanted to ask it anyway to maybe clarify it for some viewers. If an architect is doing a project as a favor or for free, or it's a very small project or whatever the case may be, it's pro bono for one reason or another, I guess the first question to ask is, why do you even need a contract in the first place? I mean, these are typically projects that might be much smaller in scope, or yeah, again, done as a favor, or maybe to get some business in the future or something like that. So why do you even need to sign a contract like this if you're not getting paid for it?
Yeah, good question. I think there's probably a lot of folks out there that architects that would end up doing these kinds of services for free without a contract on kind of a handshake basis. Well, that's great if everything goes perfectly, but as you mentioned before, a lot disputes break out on projects. You're still expected as the architect to perform your services in accordance with your standard of care. It's possible that you're going to have issues that arise, and you really want a contract to protect yourself and there's nothing wrong with having a contract even though you are providing services for free. In fact, I would say that it is good practice to do that because all of the provisions that we've already mentioned, things like being able to terminate the project or terminate your services and leave the project for your own convenience, limitation of liability. These are very important risk allocating provisions that you want to have that protection in case something does go awry.
And I would imagine too, even from the owner's perspective, it would make sense and it would benefit them to have a contract in place so they understand exactly what the scope of work is, and maybe if it's on a handshake basis, it might be unclear if does it include pre-design, does it include basic, supplemental, etc. So that that seems to make sense as well along the lines of what you were saying. So yeah, thanks for clarifying that.
Sure, and there's a lot about the pro bono agreement that we have not talked about in this video, but it does include things like insurance requirements. Just because the architect is going to be providing services for free doesn't mean that they're not going to have errors and omissions insurance. In fact, the B106 requires them. It has fill points just like the B101 or B104 does to fill out for the the kind of insurance that professional liability insurance that the architect should have. So if I'm an owner and I'm getting services for free, I want to be getting those services from someone who has insurance for professional liability. So yes, it definitely protects the owner as well. So with that, if you like this video, please go to our YouTube page and like and subscribe. And also, you could, if you want to know more about our contracts, you can go to aiacontracts.org/learn. You can also email us for content questions at docinfo@aia.org, or if you have tech support issues with our online service, go to docstechsupport@aia.org as well. Thank you very much.